Hey, I'm Caleb, part of the Narrate team. Thanks for listening to the Narrate podcast. This is part 2 of a series we are in called One But Two. This is a marriage series, but also applies to the other relationships that we have in life. And so whether you are single or you're married, I think there are some key takeaways and observations that you can have. And so this week, Adam asked the question in the context of marriage, how can we be two but also maintain exclusivity?
It's supposed to be corny and tacky and butchered, but these guys are too talented to do corny and tacky and butchered. So thank you guys. If you weren't with us last week, the creative team had this insane idea, I think, to do a video intro or to do an intro to a series without a video. And so really what we did was saddled Caleb with a whole bunch of work as he's been building these things in the band and all that. So what you missed was the start of a series that we're calling One But Two. And what I said last week is we're trying to create candid conversation around this issue that when you talk about relationship, and particularly when you talk about covenant relationship, we talk a lot about oneness, and rightly so. I mean, oneness is what gets us into this mess, right? It's what we're after. And yet there's an apparent contradiction, it seems, in a relationship, especially in a covenant relationship, and that is that there's still separateness. And it seems like, especially within the context of church and Christianity and the text, it's really difficult to acknowledge that, yeah, you're one, but you're also still two. And especially if we don't understand the way the text and the language communicates this, then what we get caught up in is this idea that the perfect marriage is the one where there's just complete overlap and loss of self. And so last week we tried to start a conversation, and I hope that was helpful to begin to talk about, and I think maybe this question summarizes last week best, where we just said, what if in order for oneness to work, we also need separateness? Go ahead with that next slide, guys. And this kind of was everything we did last week. We kind of hung on this question. And what we explored was that even in the text, God uses a specific word to describe himself. Anybody remember that word? Ahad. Yeah, remember, you kind of have to choke to say it. And it's the word that God uses to describe himself. And what we know about himself is that he is triune. And so he's in a relationship of one, which is a bit of a paradox. And yet that's the same word that the text uses to describe marriage. And so it's this both end kind of tension. This morning, what I want to dive into is, I suppose, the other side of that coin. And I suppose for probably some of you, the question isn't how do we find healthy separateness, though I gather that has been a helpful thing for many of you. But the question I want to ask this morning is, okay, so how do we find any level of oneness? Maybe you're at a place where what you're recognizing is there's been a bit of a migration, that you started with a dose of oneness, but you don't have it anymore. And perhaps for you, the question is less about separateness, like you kind of got that figured out, maybe even to a fault, but you're trying to figure out how in this season of your life, how do you have oneness? I heard a lady that we'll talk about a little bit later say that in the West, every adult will have 3 marriages. And she said those 3 marriages can be to the same person or to 3 different people, but that in the West, the way life is constructed in our individualist culture, if nothing else, what it means is your marriage will have multiple seasons. And so maybe for you, you're at this place of like, what does it look like for us to have oneness in this season? Maybe you're someone and you feel pretty good about your oneness, but you can see a new season coming and you're a little freaked out. Maybe you're someone who's engaged or dating and there is oneness, but you're trying to figure out how do you maintain that because you're not naive. You look around you and there's carnage everywhere. And so you're trying to figure out how would I proactively, humbly protect us and myself from this. Maybe you're single, and listen, one of the difficulties of a series like this is to create this idea that you're like half complete if you're single. And nothing could be further from the truth. The text talks about singleness in a very dignified way. And so there's really just no way to do a series, though, without the implied, like we're all headed towards marriage, even though we're all not. Okay, so we just kind of level that playing field. I think if you're someone that there's no desire for a relationship, then obviously what marriage is it's this incredible parallel between the way we relate to another and the way it relates to God. And it seems like in many ways it is a training ground for a relationship with God. But maybe you are single and maybe you are looking ahead to this desired relationship in the future. And my hope is that what we can create in this conversation are some handles that you can use to think about who you're going to date and who you're not going to date, and how you'll judge health and how you'll get some outside help in judging health. Maybe you're someone who you're just kind of like, yeah, all I know is I'm bad at it. And like, I kind of got out of the last one, and I don't know that I'm even qualified to have another one. And again, that humble posture is the place that we want to operate in, this place of like, okay, so let's think about this and start conversations about this. Now, this morning, I have to warn you, if you're not careful emotionally, you could get caught up in a lot of past and a lot of guilt and a lot of like, oh yeah, that's me, and a lot of shame. And certainly God uses guilt to call us to repentance and acknowledge fault and enter into relationship with him. But could I just, before we jump into anything, I just want to go like, could we just face forward? Because you're in a new day. You're a new person. Many of you are following Jesus in a way you never have before. My interest is not back here and to somehow create shame because of what's back here. In fact, the biblical word, we're just jumping right into the deep end of the pool. You might remember Teresa on Mother's Day talked about how Paul in his letters spends chapters telling us who we are before he tells us what to do. The theological phrase there is eschatological realism. How's that for a $10 word? What eschatological realism says is that at the cross, because of the blood, because of salvation, redemption, new relationship with Jesus, you become somebody to God who you weren't before. That who he will declare you to be at his judgment, you already are. Eschatological realism, eschatological, that captures your future identity. Realism is this process. What eschatological realism captures is this process of the Christian life is God pulling you into, in your behavior, who he already says you are. Does that make any sense? Maybe you're someone and you're like, I don't even know that I follow Jesus. Well, that's what's at stake. That is the gift. That is the offer that God goes, you can have a new identity in me, in my son, and we will spend the rest of these days pulling you into that. I think that's important because we're going to talk about stuff that could just cause you to spend a lot of time in regret, and I don't want you to go there, okay? Okay? Okay, so I want to make two observations. They're observations that are not formed straight from a verse, so you're going to get to choose this morning whether or not you think I'm crazy or not. But there's two observations that I think get us to this question of how do we have oneness. The first one is this. It seems that we are wired with what I'm going to call a reckless, seemingly illogical desire for oneness. I kind of want to make the case this morning that everything that we go after with oneness, biologically, we don't have to have. And yet we still go after it. And then secondarily, it seems that once acquired, the same energy we use to capture and to possess oneness, if we're not careful, we use it for something else. So these two ideas, it's almost reckless, this desire we have. And then like so many things, once we get it, it's like we're like squirrel. And there's this thing that happens. So let's just talk about this first one, that we are wired with this, what I'm going to call a seemingly reckless kind of desire for oneness. There's a gal named Donna Freitas. I recommend getting your hands on everything that you can find from Donna Freitas. She's this brilliant thinker and PhD level researcher, professor from the East Coast. She has spent the bulk of her adult years researching what she calls American hookup culture. American hookup culture, of course, you already kind of know what I'm talking about. She says there's a social contract involved in hookup culture, and it involves four things. First of all, go ahead, next slide. Hooking up, by the way, it can involve anything from kissing to sex. She says, second of all, that hooking up is brief. By definition, it moves quickly. Third, that you must feel zero emotion. In fact, in many hookup situations, there's an intentional lack of conversation because the desire to avoid emotional connection is part of the deal. And number four, especially in colleges and universities, hookup culture almost always, she says, involves alcohol. Now, Donna Freitas has worked extensively on colleges and universities across the country, and here's what she wanted to know. In light of hookup culture, this is why I'm saying, let's not talk about the past. Don't go there. We're moving forward. But what she wanted to know was, are students in particular, because we're assuming here that universities reflect to us ourselves in so many ways, are they content? Are they happy? Because at the surface, what you have is a perfect situation when it comes to the biology of sexuality. You have complete anonymity. You have, especially thanks to the medical world that we live in and the ability to prevent pregnancy, you have sexuality without consequence, supposedly. You have fantasy to the nth degree. You have incredible availability. What she says is that in the general American university scene, hookup culture is an assumed reality of the experience. Just like it's assumed that you're going to put on 10 pounds, it's assumed as a student you're going to participate in hookup culture. She wanted to know, are they happy? Here's what she found. First of all, she said 36% of students, according to her research, and this is ongoing, it's longitudinal as well. Wait, that might not be accurate. But this isn't like a one-time deal, but she's going with it. 36% of them, she said, are fine. They're like, yeah, this is great. We love this whole experience. Another 41%, she said, on the other end of the spectrum, are what she calls profoundly unhappy. So you have the largest contingent of students going, no, I don't like this at all. And there's the remaining percent, 23%, she calls them the whateverists. They're ambivalent. They're kind of like, yeah, there's parts of it that I like and there's parts of it that I don't like. Whatever. What she's learning is that it's the whateverist contingent that's growing the fastest. And as she delved deeper and deeper into this, the way I'm understanding it is we got to hear her at a conference a couple years ago and have spent a little time. I was trying to get her to come to Narrate for about a year, and then I gave up on that and thought, okay, I'll just plagiarize your stuff then. So what she found is that when you get inside the mind of students, what they're doing is they're playing a giant game of poker with one another. Because as she delves deeper and deeper, what she's finding is that a growing majority of students actually want something way more than hooking up. But just like so many other things in life, the thinking is, I'm the only one that wants something more. And if I acknowledge that, then it'll be social suicide. And so you have a bunch of students participating in a culture where there is not dating, there is not any kind of relationship, wanting something more, but not being willing to admit it. In fact, here's the way she summarizes her research. She says both women and men yearn for romance. Women and, yes, men. She says both women and men, they wish for, and these are her words, good old-fashioned dating. And finally, she says what she's finding in universities and colleges is both women and men, what they want are connection. I love the way she says it. They want to spend lavish amounts of energy getting to know and becoming known. Now, here's the question. Does it strike you as a little illogical? If we're just considering biology and sexual organs and fantasy and the mind, does it make any sense that they would be dissatisfied in this situation? See, it begins to get at, why is that? Why is there this desire for something more? Why is there this desire for connection in a way that, many ways, we say we don't need? Now, you don't have to dig around very far to find, it seems like it's a growing, maybe I'm just more and more aware of it, but it seems like there's this growing conversation what is that word, monogamy? This morning I was doing one final pass-through, and all I could think of was mahogany. And I couldn't get monogamy, and I was like, okay, that's funny, but no, what's the word? I had to turn around and look at my whiteboard. Monogamy. Some are suggesting that we're culturally conditioned to monogamy. They would say, look at the animal kingdom. Humans are the exception to the rule, by and large, that this is a religiously or culturally conditioned thing. And I suppose you don't have to watch too many Disney movies to see where their point comes from. That from a young age, they're saying what's ingrained in us is monogamy, and thus we've adopted that. And you don't have to look very far. Will Smith would be one who's made some waves talking about monogamy is not natural. Merle Haggard, surprise, surprise. I mean, there's lots and lots of people who are going like, monogamy it's not the natural order. Some would point a bony finger at religion. And I suppose, again, they kind of have a point. Like, has any, and this is to me what raises this, like, why do we do this? Has any institution, any idea, any human construct, any contractual agreement caused so much pain to so many people as this institution of marriage? I mean, is there anything in these, if you want to explore this more, Rob Bell does a great job with this in his new book. Yeah, I said the name. Has any Like, is there anything more painful than committing yourself, your life to another, only to have that thrown back in your face? It seems that whether it's because of cultural conditioning or religion, that there's this part of us that yearns for a unique kind of relationship. I love the way Rob says in his book that there's this enduring human longing to share your life with someone. And I guess the question that I want to ask this morning, first and foremost, whether you follow Jesus and think in that way or not, is where does that come from? Because even when you take people from outside of a Christian worldview and you give them something entirely different, what they naturally gravitate toward is this desire to have a unique kind of relationship with someone. Genesis 2:24, which is a text that we're working from in this series, it says that is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. Now, it strikes me that you can see that as a moral imperative. You can also see it as a religious command, can't you? You can read that verse as God commanding this. What if you can read it as an observation? What if we call them ancient, which is very patronizing? What if these people, long before us and long before the internet and long before all the things that we come to call our life modern, what if there was an observation that they, in partner with this God, made? And the observation was, we don't understand it. But there's this part of the human experience is this desire for a unique kind of relationship. What if what they concluded is that life works best when you find yourself in said kind of relationship? What if it's just an observation? In fact, what if the God of the text is saying, if you're looking to me as to cues for how to live, how it is I made you, what it means to be fully human, what if this God is going, I've called you into an exclusive kind of relationship with a unique kind of person? Notice exclusivity is part of this. And notice that exclusivity comes with cost. Imagine living in an agricultural world like the Mediterranean world in which this was written. You didn't have an apartment to go rent. You didn't have a job to go get. There wasn't a bank account. You had a field. And that field supported you. And what the text says is if you want this kind of relationship, you leave that. You leave family. You leave the security. You leave all that. And you start something new. I suppose if you've ever taken a new job and started a new career, started your own business, you kind of get the tension, the seemingly like illogical, like, I remember when we were first committing to leaving Harvest and Billings, there was this like, why would I leave this? Why would I choose all of this vulnerability? Notice that the exclusivity, that's part of this. So do you kind of see what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of illogical. Like if you just kind of blame it out in the human experience, you kind of go, this monogamy thing, it's kind of bad math. It's like 1 + 1 = 3. It doesn't make sense unless there's a God who perhaps made us this way. Which leads me to the second observation, because this is the other part of this, right? Is once we get it, there's this tendency to deviate from it. Have you noticed that? And in fact, it's a part of the biblical narrative. Here you have God in the second chapter of the text, in the first chapter. What chapter is it? The second? Yeah. You have God going, here, let me just give you this observation. You're going to want this as you search for life. And what happens in the pages that follow? What happens is a sexuality that couldn't deviate further. What happens is a cultural experience where as a man, the more power you had meant the more sexual assets you could obtain. What happens is some of the great heroes of the faith, and listen, I understand there's several factors at play here, but nonetheless, you have the great heroes of the faith having multiple wives, and not only that, but the degree to which they had power and resource, their wives had like servants, and all of them were sexual assets to the men. And then you have God taking Israel and going, okay, let's get this thing back on the tracks. Let's get it back on the tracks. And what does he say? Like from the very beginning, he's going to give them these clear orders on here's how I made you. Here's how you step back into my kingdom. Here's how you step back into relationship with me and live this thing out. And the seventh one, you shall not commit adultery. We're not talking about your past. And remember, Jesus reminds us that adultery is way more than the act. And then, just a few verses later, he says it again. You know this is the only command in the commandments that's actually repeated? The 10th commandment, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Now again, I'm not trying to impose anything on you. I just want to make this observation. God says, hey, there's this oneness, and I know you won't be able to explain it, but you'll want it. And then when you get it, it'll be like squirrel. And the squirrel can be lots of things. It doesn't always have to be another sexual partner. It can be, it's like the moment you get it, you deviate. There's a gal named Esther Perel. She does some TED Talks. She's a Belgian psychotherapist who's done a whole bunch of research. I recommend all her TED Talks. She's become a bit of an expert on infidelity. She asks the question, why do we cheat? And I love the subtitle because she says, what I want to know is why do happy people cheat? And there's lots and lots of ways that you could follow her research. One, of course, is there's a completely different understanding of marriage even today than there was maybe in your growing up years, because the contract used to be you'll come home every night and provide for the family. And today it's translated all the more into you'll be sexually faithful. So I realize there's some cultural things going on here. And I know you're like, well, that's a rabbit trail. Go listen to the TED Talks. She finishes, though, by saying, and I couldn't believe it when she said it, that one of the most dominant realities in the whole conversation is, and she doesn't say it this way, but what she says is there's part of us that wants what we can't have and believes that getting it is the key to happiness. And you kind of go like, wow, okay, I feel like she's an expert on the Bible. Because over and over, in fact, look back at that last command. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Turns out this isn't just about sex, is it? It's about way more. We've talked in the past that what the rabbis said was if you obeyed the 10th command, you would naturally obey the others. What they understood was the primary driver of sin, and you see James revisiting this in his letter, the primary driver of brokenness is this belief that I can be happy tomorrow because then I'll have that. And the text says over and over and over again, if you can't be happy with this, then that won't either. And what can cause us to jump from job to job to job, what can cause us to do all kinds of crazy things with our income, what can cause us to lots of things. We could go on and on, but I don't want to it gets weird because I'm like touching nerves and we all have these places, and so I'm not trying to call anyone out. But this is the issue, isn't it? So why? Why is there this gotta have it, want oneness, and then we get it? And then there's this thing that happens. I think one of the questions, maybe the most worthwhile thing for you to consider this morning is who are the intruders? If you're married, then that applies there. What are the distractions? What are the wedges? And quickly you go, it could be another. It could also be a disproportionate amount of energy toward a job. It could be a disproportionate amount of energy towards a savings account. I mean, this is where we can take seemingly good things and they become bad things. This is the tricky thing about putting a finger in someone's chest and saying, that's sin. Because if we're to be honest, golf can be a sin. I think it's almost always one, but I'm just kidding. I have a friend Fred, who I reference often, who's counseled numerous marriages. And I remember in all my years with him, he was really hard on first-time parents. And he was like this giant, cold, wet blanket. Because I heard him do it more than one time where you'd have this couple who had this little baby, and they were so delighted to have this little baby, and he'd congratulate them. And then he would look at her and go, okay, but do you understand that little thing you hold in your arms, Mom, perhaps has the greatest potential to destroy your marriage? And do you understand, Dad, that little precious one that you love so much could be the primary wedge? I was thinking that maybe the next time we do a dedication, maybe what we should do, when we bring people up here and they acknowledge gift from God, they acknowledge like we're going to do everything we can to influence them towards Jesus. They acknowledge like we need your help. Maybe from there we should like toss the baby back into the room and go like, okay, there's a fourth one. Do you, mom, vow to do everything you know to continue to put your husband before that son or daughter? And do you, husband, vow to love that son or daughter first and foremost by loving your wife first? See, the textual warning seems to be this cyclical, you'll have to have it. In fact, we did a whole series around this last year, like want it, have it, wish I didn't. This thing that happens. So, of course, the question becomes, so how do we create oneness? And I'm not an expert here, you guys. I'm a student like all of you. I just have a few thoughts. First of all, if you're single, I know I'm going to sound like a prude. Move slow. Like, just move slow. If you were to ask me to summarize it, just slow down. There's something that happens in what's the word I'm looking for? In subatomic particles. So you know I'm plagiarizing when I'm starting to talk about subatomic particles. Rob Bell talks about in subatomic particles, when two particles come together, even after they're separated, they remember each other. I think God says it this way in Malachi. I'm just going to read it from up there. Go ahead, skip. Yeah. God says it this way, for I hate divorce. Now, again, is this a guilt-inducing passage? Or is it an observation? For those of you that are single and trafficking that direction and infatuated perhaps at this point, I don't know a divorced person who wouldn't look you in the eye and say, I hate divorce. This isn't to say that your life can't recover. This isn't to say that you're hopeless. This isn't to say that God rejects you. It's not to say any of those things. But I dare you, find a divorced person, whether it was one that needed to happen or not. You're not going to find one who doesn't say, I hate divorce. Why? Because it's brutal. Because particles who are ripped apart, they remember each other. Because it's not the way you're made. It's not to say you can't recover. It is to say, slow down. There's 6 billion people on the planet. Lots of them to meet. Make sure you're doing the right thing. And seek counsel. Seek counsel. John Townsend, this one you might not like it, but John Townsend says that if the only people speaking into your life are your family of origin, then you're playing with fire. This doesn't mean like hang out with your sister. It doesn't mean like talk to your parents. But you can do that too. Welcome outsiders into the relationship. I had a friend a while ago who said like, hey, I'm thinking about marrying this person. What do you think? And I'm like, why are you asking me that question? Like, you've done nothing but isolate for the entire relationship. You can't ask me that question. Seek counsel. Give someone permission to tell you she's crazy or he's crazy or you're an idiot or whatever. Put yourself in that vulnerable position. And for the rest of us, I'm really excited to explore this idea next week in more depth, but I love the way Kristen Bell says it. She says, just always be on the journey together. Just always be on the journey together. Next week, I want to talk about a view of marriage that doesn't see it as an institution, but as an adventure, and one with multiple seasons. But I guess maybe the challenge for you this week is to just think about, are you on the journey together? Because there's going to be different seasons to that journey, but are you journeying together? And you could probably compile a long list of things that may be good indications that you are. I just put together a few from in my own head and experience. Like are you having meals together with some regularity? And are you doing it over a table, not on a couch in front of a TV? Or are you going to bed at the same time more often than not? And no, that's not about sex. It's about something else entirely. Now, are you in a sexless marriage? Now, sometimes you don't have any choice, and I'm not trying to be cold to that. But the research on sexless marriages isn't good, which means, if nothing else, you've got a challenge for yourself. Are you reading the same books and listening to the same podcasts? Or are you constantly passing information back and forth? Because isn't the real tension here that we'll outpace one another? Isn't the tension that one person will grow in a direction and we won't go with them? Maybe a way to think about it is, are you taking an interest in each other the way you once did? You know, when you were dating, you probably hated that, but you did it. Why? Because you were on a hunt, right? And you find motivation that you don't have when you're not hunting anymore. I get it, and I don't mean hunting literally. But are you taking interest in one another? There's a really neat story from around here of a couple who, for a long time, he attended here and his wife somewhere else, and that was that. And then their life shifted, and suddenly they started to get to come here together. And they come here together, and then they go there together. And when I heard that story for the first time, I was just so proud of him. Way to go. She agreed to come here. You didn't agree to go there. But you are. Are you taking an interest in each other? Are you like you probably hate Macy's. Who doesn't? She might like it. You might hate football. But sit on the couch. Watch a game. Early in our marriage, when Teresa and I were dating, it was pretty apparent that she loved hiking and backpacking and camping, and she was raised by a lumberjack dad, and so, like, she's the man in the relationship in so many ways. And so when we were dating, you just have energy you don't have when you're married, right? I mean, this is a blah. But so we were doing stuff together, and I was motivated, and then we got married, and then we would try to do that. And I'm talking skiing. I didn't do any of this stuff. Trail running, skiing, none of it. I just sat at home and read books and watched football. Played traditional sports in a city where it was safe and there was people there and my cell phone had coverage. Things like that. I remember I have this real poignant memory where I didn't know it at the time. What I now understand was my anxiety expressed itself doing those things in ways that I didn't even know what it was. We just concluded I don't do that. And I have this distinct memory of sitting. There was this couple who agreed to have dinner with us once a month for the first couple of years, and just kind of talking through life and marriage, because the learning kind of begins once you have to share the bathroom sink, right? And so we were talking with them, and Teresa was somehow sharing that when we were dating, I would do hiking and stuff like that, and now that we're married, I won't. And I was she just kind of accepted it. And he kind of, how you kind of just have to I'm interrupting this flow of consciousness. And he got real firm and he looked at me and he said, Adam, I think to represent yourself one way while you're dating and then to change that after you're married, he said, I think that's devious. I think he might have even used the word evil. You don't get to do that, Adam. I think as you consider oneness and how do you accomplish it, maybe it just starts with this simple conversation of are you still taking an interest in one another like you did when you were dating? And finally, I'll get off my soapbox after this. How are you talking about each other? Ever heard someone talk about their spouse and you're like, oh, geez, hate to be your enemy? Part of the exclusivity is there's supposed to be parts of the relationship that nobody else gets to be a part of. Ever heard somebody sharing stuff that you're like, oh man, that sounds a little, You're reminded of Jesus in Matthew 12. He says, go ahead, next slide. I'll tell you this. You're going to give an account on the judgment day for every idle word you speak. Now, is that because one of God's pet moralistic issues are words? Or is it because words have such formative power that reality follows them? Maybe if you're struggling with oneness, maybe you start with how do you talk to your girlfriends? How do you talk to the guys about each other? I feel like one of the best pieces of marriage advice I've ever received was a friend saying, Adam, you get one place to talk about the dirt in your marriage. You get one person to talk about Teresa's dirt with, and she has to be there. And I just wonder if that was the only thing we applied, how much that might change the sense of connection. That's not to say that we need to put on a false front and pretend like everything's perfect, but you know the feeling, right, of knowing that someone disses on you when your back's turned to them. How do you possibly feel emotional connectedness to somebody who you know does that with you? Some tough stuff doesn't belong on Facebook. Some stuff doesn't belong in the workroom chatter. Some stuff is supposed to be exclusive. and the degree to which it has to be talked about, they deserve to be there. So how do we do this? That's just my challenge. Maybe for you, maybe you're thinking about your words. Maybe for you, you're thinking about taking an interest. You know, it strikes me, what if in one sense, everything I've said is wrong this morning? It's bad when this hits you on Saturday morning and you're thinking through the message for the last time, and I'm like, I think everything I'm saying is wrong. What if the issue is you are always after oneness, but if you're not careful, you'll change who you're after it with or what you're after it with? I'd like to pray. God, we're grateful for you and the way you've made us. And Jesus, none of us is here. We're not here as experts. We're not here because we've arrived. We're not here because any one of us necessarily knows anything more than anybody else. But we recognize there is this seemingly magnetic pull towards something in us. And then we get distracted. And God, in these more silent, quiet moments, we recognize that the calling you gave us is to love another. And to allow that to be, if nothing else, the engine room in which you teach us what it means to love you and for you to love us. We love you, God. Amen.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.